Charleston's oldest auction archives contain an anomaly that city officials quietly pulled from public access in 1891. Among the thousands of documented transactions from the Ryland and Marsh slave auction house, one record stands utterly impossible. A single woman purchased 17 different times by 17 separate plantation owners across South Carolina between March and November of 1844. Each sale drew a higher price than the last. Each buyer was a respected name among Charleston's upper class. Yet the municipal ledger shows something that should not exist. The same woman, identified by unchanged physical descriptions and a distinctive marking, sold again and again over 8 months, while clerks recorded each transaction with flawless precision. No historical precedent exists for such a pattern. No rational explanation appears in any surviving correspondence from that year. And when the South Carolina Historical Society later cataloged the documents in 1923, they sealed them in restricted collections with a single note attached. Requires governor-level authorization for access. Public interest concerns. Before we continue with what happened inside Ryland and Marsh in 1844, I want to invite you to subscribe to this channel and tap the notification bell so you never miss stories like this. And tell me in the comments, what state are you listening from? I always love hearing where our audience uncovers these buried chapters of American history. Now, let's examine what those 17 transactions actually reveal about the darkness that settled over Charleston's elite that year. The spring of 1844 arrived with strange weather, an unbroken fog that drifted in from the harbor each morning and clung to the streets past noon, wrapping the narrow lanes in a muted, gray hush. The auction houses along Chalmers Street continued their operations regardless, their rhythmic sales as routine as they had been for decades. Ryland and Marsh was among the most esteemed, a 3-story brick establishment where the region's wealthiest planters acquired labor for their sprawling rice and cotton estates. The Marsh operations were overseen by Thomas Gadbury, a former banker who had entered the auction trade in 1837. At 42, his reputation for meticulous ledgers was unmatched. He recorded every sale with the precision of a legal clerk. Names, ages, physical descriptions, prices, buyer identities, and seller details. His books were so reliable that attorneys and estate managers regularly referenced them in disputes. Gadbury employed 4 assistants who inspected the inventory, authenticated documents, and ensured the proceedings adhered to South Carolina law. The city itself stretched along the peninsula where the Ashley and Cooper rivers flowed into the Atlantic, its entire economy balanced on enslaved labor and the crops produced by it. Charleston's elite, the Pringles, Ravenels, Horrys, Hoogies, controlled fortunes accumulated over generations. Their rivalries went beyond wealth, extending into social prestige, political influence, and subtle demonstrations of power that shaped the Southern aristocracy. Each spring marked the planting season, and with it came planters seeking to enlarge their workforces or replace laborers lost to illness, injury, or the lethal arithmetic that underpinned the system. March 19th arrived under its familiar blanket of fog, and with it came a seller Gadbury had never encountered. The man introduced himself as Nathaniel Claiborne, a factor representing a Savannah estate. He produced papers showing ownership of a woman he claimed had served as domestic staff, now being liquidated due to the estate's dissolution. The woman stood apart from others gathered for sale that morning. Her posture suggested education uncommon among the enslaved, and her expression held a controlled stillness, trained, guarded, deliberate. Gadbury entered her details into his ledger with habitual care. Approximately 27 or 28 years old, literate, experienced in household management, fluent in French, skilled in needlework and music, with an unusual birthmark on her left shoulder blade. 3 tiny dots forming a perfect triangle, each no larger than a pea. He assigned her inventory number 84473 and recorded the name Claiborne provided. The line. The auction proceeded as usual. Gadbury had presided over thousands of such transactions, and this one seemed no different. Planters examined the woman, inquired about her health, her training, her temperament, calculating her potential worth. But the bidding for DeLine veered immediately into territory Gadbury had never witnessed in his 7 years managing the mart. Colonel Elias Haynewood, owner of 3 rice plantations totaling nearly 9,000 acres in the Georgetown district, opened with $800, already astonishing for a female slave, regardless of ability. Henry Pinkerton, of a family whose coastal holdings stretched from Charleston to Beaufort, countered instantly with $1,000. The bids escalated far beyond rational economic logic, rising faster than Gadbury could process his astonishment. When the hammer finally fell, it settled on Robert Drayton, patriarch of one of South Carolina's oldest dynasties. He paid $2,800, nearly 10 times the typical cost of a highly skilled female slave. The other planters exchanged uneasy glances but voiced no objections. Gadbury noted the final price, the buyer's name, and the date. Drayton arranged for DeLine's transport to his Ashley River plantation and departed. 3 days later, Nathaniel Claiborne returned to Ryland and Marsh, with the same woman beside him, and with fresh documents asserting his right to sell her once again. To sell her again. For the first time in his professional life, Gadbury's careful composure cracked. "Sir," he said tightly, "I personally witnessed Mr. Drayton purchase this woman just 72 hours ago. The transaction is recorded in my ledgers with full documentation." Claiborne's expression remained calm, almost entertained. "I now represent Mr. Drayton's interests," he replied. "Circumstances have changed regarding his acquisition. The sale was lawful, but Mr. Drayton has determined she no longer suits his household. He has authorized me to arrange her resale." "Mr. Drayton is among Charleston's most respected planters," Gadbury said, choosing his words with care. "It seems extraordinary that he would make such a costly misjudgment." Claiborne placed a new set of papers on Gadbury's desk. "Everything is in order. You will find Mr. Drayton's signature authorizing resale, properly witnessed and notarized, unless you're suggesting there is some irregularity in the documentation." Gadbury examined the papers. They appeared legitimate. The signature was unmistakably Drayton's. The legal phrasing was correct. The notary seal matched ones he had seen dozens of times. Nothing violated the law. Slaves were property, and property could be sold repeatedly at the owner's discretion. Yet something in the situation prickled with wrongness, an unease Gadbury couldn't fully explain. Nevertheless, he accepted the consignment. The second auction occurred 4 days after the first. This time, bidding began at $1,000 and rose even faster. Gadbury also noticed a shift. Several planters who had bid in the first sale were absent, while others, men who had shown no earlier interest, now competed with startling aggression. The pattern felt orchestrated, though Gadbury could not identify the motive. In the end, Charles Coatsworth Pinkham, cousin of Hampton Pinkerton and owner of massive indigo fields, purchased DeLine for $3,200. He signed the paperwork without expression and ordered her transported to his plantation outside Walterboro. Gadbury watched Claiborne's departure with a cold certainty in his chest. The factor would return. He did, exactly 1 week later, with identical documents authorizing yet another resale, now on behalf of Charles Coatsworth Pinkham. By the fourth sale in mid-April, the pattern had hardened into something deeply troubling. Gadbury documented each step with growing unease. Every buyer was a prominent planter of unimpeachable social standing. Each paid drastically more than the previous one, and each, within days, authorized Claiborne to resell her, offering only vague explanations, unsuitable for household needs, a mismatch of temperament, unexpected inconvenience. Every transaction held up under Gadbury's increasingly suspicious scrutiny. Every signature was authentic, every seal legitimate. There was nothing he could challenge legally. The woman herself, DeLine, remained unchanged. Through every auction, she carried the same controlled, measured composure. She answered questions politely, stood quietly during inspections, and showed not the slightest reaction to the escalating prices or the eerie repetition of her fate. To Gadbury, Her stillness was far more disturbing than any display of fear would have been. It was as though she expected each sale, as though the impossibility of her situation was unfolding exactly as anticipated. Charleston's auction houses formed a tight network, where information traveled swiftly despite the veneer of propriety. Rumors circulated quietly. Other managers asked vague, probing questions about Gadbury's recent business. Factors who typically competed fiercely for consignments seemed to avoid Ryland and Marsh whenever Claiborne appeared. By the sixth sale in early May, another shift emerged. The men purchasing the line were changing subtly but undeniably. Robert Drayton, the first buyer, had nearly vanished from Charleston society. His wife had left their Ashley River estate to stay with relatives in Columbia, citing health concerns. Charles Coatsworth Pinkham had withdrawn from his usual commitments at the Charleston Library Society and stopped attending the Street Cecilia Society's prestigious gatherings. Augustus Huger, the third buyer, dismissed as overseer and began personally managing his plantation for the first time in 2 decades, refusing all visitors. Meanwhile, the prices kept climbing. By July, the line sold to Theodore Gaillard for $6,000, an amount so extreme it equaled the value of 6 skilled male field hands, or nearly 3 years of profit from a mid-sized plantation. Gadbury entered each sale into his ledgers with meticulous care. But now he kept a second journal, locked in his desk, one where he recorded his private concerns. The buyers are not acting rationally, he wrote after the 9th sale in August. They bid with an intensity wholly divorced from economic logic. Men known for shrewd negotiation abandon restraint the moment she is presented. They behave as though compelled, driven by something beyond the desire to acquire valuable property. What Gadbury could not document in official records were the conversations he had begun having in whispered tones with Charleston's other professional overseers. Factors who managed estates, attorneys who drafted contracts, bankers who handled credit. Each had noticed disturbances that year, though none had explanations. Hampton Pinkerton came to me last month requesting a loan against his property. Jonathan Willard, a prominent banker, told Gadbury over dinner at the Charleston Club. Willard spoke in a low voice, conscious that even hinting at financial irregularities violated the unspoken code of their social circle. He has never needed credit before. His family's holdings bring an enormous annual income, but he claimed he had exhausted his liquid capital and required $15,000 immediately. When I inquired about the cause, he became tense, almost offensive, said it was a private matter. I approved a loan based on family standing, but the situation disturbed me. A man of his wealth does not suddenly require such emergency credit without serious reason. Did he mention what depleted his funds? Gadbury asked. Willard glanced around the dining room before responding. He mentioned making an investment that failed to produce its expected returns. Said he needed to recover losses from a venture that had proven unsuitable. Those were his precise words, unsuitable. The same word that appeared over and over in the resale authorizations Claiborne had delivered to Ryland's Mart. Gadbury began investigating more directly, though he still couldn't articulate exactly what he was searching for or why it mattered. The sales were lawful. The buyers were willing participants. No statute had been broken, and yet the pattern felt like a rupture in the natural order, something fundamentally wrong in the way the world should operate. By September, Gadbury made a decision he knew could ruin his reputation. He hired a private inquiry agent, a former Charleston constable named David Brunswell, now known for discreet investigations on behalf of attorneys and businessmen. I want you to trace what happens after each sale, Gadbury instructed, handing over copies of his ledger entries. Speak with the buyers if possible, quietly. Find out why they resold her. Learn anything you can about their experiences with this woman. Brunswell worked for 3 weeks, traveling across the Carolina Lowcountry, speaking with overseers, domestic staff, and, under various pretexts, occasionally the planters themselves. What he reported confirmed Gadbury's worst suspicions. Something deeply wrong was unfolding. Not one planter kept her longer than 5 days. Brunswell said, spreading his notes across the desk late one night when the auction house was empty. Most returned to Charleston within 48 hours. I spoke with the overseer at the Huger plantation, a man named Price who's been there 30 years. He said Mr. Huger bought the woman with clear instructions. She was to work in the main house, personal attendance for Mrs. Huger. Brunswell paused, his expression tightening. But the very first evening, something happened. Price doesn't know what. He only knows that Mr. Huger came out of the house at dawn looking ruined. He ordered the woman confined in the overseer's cabin and sent for Claiborne immediately to arrange resale. Did Huger offer any explanation? Gadbury asked. Only that she was unsuitable. Those exact words again. Price said he'd never seen Mr. Huger look the way he did that morning. Said the man seemed to have aged 10 years overnight. Brunswell flipped through his notes. Theodore Gallard kept her 3 days. His body servant, Marcus. He served the family since Theodore was a child. Told me Mr. Gallard stayed shut in his study with her for hours the first night. Marcus heard conversation. Not shouting, not arguing, just two people speaking for hours on end. When Gallard finally came out, he looked, in Marcus's words, as if he looked straight at the devil. He sent her back to Charleston immediately. Every buyer's household offered similar accounts. None shared details. All used the same explanation, that she was unsuitable for their needs, and all seemed profoundly altered by whatever had occurred during their brief possession of her. "There's something else," Brunswell added. "I looked into this factor, Nathaniel Claiborne. I can't find a record of him operating in Savannah or anywhere in Georgia before March of this year. No business registration, no property, no family connections I can trace. It's like he appeared out of nowhere solely to handle these sales and exists for nothing else. Have you tried locating him between auctions?" Gadbury asked. "He keeps a room at a boarding house on Queen Street when he's in the city. But I've watched the place several times. Never once saw him enter or leave. The landlady says he pays in advance, stays quiet, and she hardly ever sees him. Yet, somehow, he appears the moment another sale is scheduled." Gadbury stared at his ledgers, meticulous, orderly records documenting events that should not be possible. "What about the woman herself?" he asked. "Did you learn anything about her background?" Brunswell hesitated, visibly unsettled. That's where things get truly strange. "I found this estate in Savannah that Claiborne claimed to represent, the Beaumont estate, owned by a family who made their money in cotton factoring. The estate was dissolved early in 1844, exactly as he said. But when I checked their property records, there was no listing for any enslaved woman named Aline or anyone matching her description. None. Their final inventory, filed with the Chatham County Court, lists 11 enslaved individuals, every one of them a male field worker, all sold in January of that year." "Then where did she come from?" Gadbury asked quietly. "I don't know," Brunswell admitted. "I checked slave ship manifests arriving in Savannah and Charleston for the past 2 years. Nothing. I reviewed estate sales and auction records across Georgia and South Carolina. No one matches her description or that triangular birthmark you recorded. It's as if she simply appeared with Claiborne in March, carrying documents that should be fraudulent but somehow pass every test of legitimacy." Before Gadbury could respond, footsteps echoed down the hallway outside his office. Both men froze. The building should have been empty. Gadbury had sent his assistants home hours earlier, and he'd locked the street entrance himself. The door opened without a knock. Nathaniel Claiborne stepped inside, his expression as unreadable as ever. "Good evening, Mr. Gadbury," he said smoothly. "I understand you've been conducting inquiries into my business affairs. I thought we might have a discussion about the questions you've been asking." Gadbury rose slowly, placing himself between Claiborne and the ledger spread across his desk. Brunswell's hand drifted toward the pistol concealed inside his coat, a leftover from his constable days. "Your business affairs have caused considerable concern," Gadbury said evenly. "Less than the The same individual over 8 months represents an unprecedented pattern. I have obligations to maintain the integrity of this establishment. You fulfilled those obligations admirably, Claiborne replied. Every transaction has been properly recorded, every legal requirement met. I'm not aware of any statute limiting how many times property may be resold. The law may permit it, Gadbury said carefully, but the pattern suggests something beyond normal commerce. The buyers are prominent men, and each of them has suffered consequences following their purchase. Several are under financial strain. Others have withdrawn from society altogether. I've documented behavioral changes that imply these transactions involve far more than simple dissatisfaction. Claiborne stepped further into the office, and for the first time Gadbury noticed a strange quality to him. How the man seemed to absorb light rather than reflect it, as though he existed slightly out of alignment with the space around him. "Mr. Gadbury," Claiborne said with near-friendly calm, "you're a meticulous man. You keep impeccable records. You follow procedure precisely. These qualities serve you well. But the questions you're asking have no answers you'll find satisfactory. The transactions will continue. 2 more sales remain. I suggest you document them as you have the others and allow events to unfold." 2 more sales. Gadbury repeated. "You speak as though the sequence has a predetermined ending." "Everything has an ending, Mr. Gadbury. Some endings," Claiborne said, "are planned more carefully than others." Brunswell stepped forward, his hand now plainly resting on the pistol beneath his coat. "I was a constable for 12 years. I've investigated fraud, forgery, conspiracy. The documents you produced are fabricated. The woman you're selling has no legitimate origin in any manifest or state registry. Whatever you're doing exists outside the law, no matter how proper the papers appear. Legal boundaries," Claiborne murmured thoughtfully. "Tell me, Mr. Brunswell, how many thousands of human beings have been bought and sold in Charleston over the past century? How many families torn apart? How many lives ruined? All within perfect legal boundaries. The law has shown remarkable flexibility when determining who qualifies as property. My activities operate quite comfortably within that same flexibility." "You're not answering the fundamental question," Gadbury said. "What is she? Where did she come from? And what happens to the men who purchase her?" For the first time, Claiborne's expression shifted. Something faint, almost like satisfaction, or perhaps simply acknowledgement that a boundary had been reached and further concealment was pointless. "What she is," he said slowly, "is exactly what Charleston's elite have always desired. An acquisition demonstrating wealth, refinement, power. A woman educated, cultured, beautiful. Property that elevates the owner's status merely through possession. These men bid not for her labor, but for the prestige of owning her." "That still doesn't explain the pattern," Gadbury insisted. "It doesn't explain why they all resell her immediately, doesn't it?" Claiborne tilted his head. "Consider what happens once the acquisition becomes reality. When these planters, pillars of Charleston society, masters of vast domains built entirely on enslaved labor, find themselves alone with property they now own absolutely. Property that speaks, reasons, questions. Property that knows things about them, their debts, their secrets, their cruelties, their fears, the specific methods by which they built their fortunes, the shame they bear in the hours before dawn while publicly defending those same practices in daylight." The office fell silent except for the distant rumble of carriage wheels on the street outside. "She talks to them," Brunswell said quietly. "That's what this is. She talks." "She converses," Claiborne corrected, "about history, philosophy, the mathematics of valuing human beings as livestock. She discusses the precise decisions by which men justify buying other men and call it necessity, the exact moral price of wealth built on suffering. She is exceptionally well educated, you understand. She can articulate these matters with remarkable nuance." A coldness settled into Gadbury's stomach, and after these conversations they send her back. "They send her back," Claiborne confirmed. Because continuing to own her becomes intolerable. Because every moment in her presence forces them to confront truths they've spent their entire lives refusing to see. Because she becomes a mirror they cannot bear to face. So they resell her, often at enormous financial loss, just to escape her. And the next buyer, Gadbury said, knows nothing. Precisely, Claiborne answered. The previous owner will not explain, cannot explain. How does a man of stature admit that a slave unraveled his peace of mind simply by existing under his roof? How does he confess such profound weakness? He doesn't. So each new buyer steps in with the same arrogance as the last, believing himself immune. This is a form of revenge, Gadbury said, against Charleston's planters specifically. Revenge implies anger, Claiborne replied. What is happening here is education, a demonstration of principles. These men learn exactly what it means to own another human being, not in abstract economic theory, but in the intimate reality of their private lives. Most people never truly consider what they participate in. She ensures that these particular men do consider it. Thoroughly. Brunswell's hand tightened on his pistol. I could arrest you right now, bring you before a magistrate, and force you to explain these activities to the authorities. You could attempt it, Claiborne replied calmly. But tell me, what crime would you accuse me of? Every sale has been lawful. Every document passes scrutiny from men whose careers depend on detecting forgery. No violence, no threats. I've simply arranged transactions between willing buyers and sellers. If the buyers regret their decisions afterward, that is a private negotiation between themselves and their consciences. 2 more sales, Gadbury said. You mentioned 2 remain. Why a specific number? What happens after the 19th sale? Claiborne began moving toward the door. The sequence will conclude naturally. The final buyer will receive precisely what he deserves, and then the cycle will end. I recommend you document these last transactions carefully, Mr. Gadbury. They may prove historically important. He left without waiting for any reply, leaving Gadbury and Brunswell surrounded by ledgers, questions multiplying faster than answers. The 16th sale took place on October 3rd, and Gadbury recognized the winning bidder immediately. James Harrington Hammond, former governor of South Carolina, congressman, and owner of plantations stretching over 10,000 acres. Hammond was a figure both admired and whispered about, brilliant, ruthless, and perpetually encircled by scandals his allies worked tirelessly to bury. He paid $7,200 for the line, the highest price Gadbury had ever recorded for any enslaved person. Hammond signed with dramatic flair and arranged her transport to his Silver Bluff estate near Augusta. 4 days later, Claiborne returned with authorization for resale. But this time, something was different. The factor's usual impenetrable composure showed fractures, tension around the eyes, a stiffness in his jaw, a sense of anticipation or pressure. Mr. Hammond determined she was extremely unsuitable for his household. Claiborne said, placing the papers on the desk, he has authorized immediate resale with no minimum price. Gadbury examined the documentation. Hammond's signature wavered, uneven strokes revealing a trembling hand. The margins were filled with notations, numbers scratched out, recalculations, attempts to quantify something that clearly resisted measurement. What did she say to him? Gadbury asked quietly. For the first time, Claiborne met his gaze directly. She recited his exact financial debts, he said. The creditors he's concealed from, the methods he's used to force additional labor from his slaves, methods that violate South Carolina law and would annihilate his political legacy if exposed. She discussed certain personal entanglements that would disgrace his family, and then she asked how he reconciles his public championing of honor and states' rights with the private cruelties he commits behind closed doors. Claiborne paused. Former Governor Hammond found the conversation deeply educational. You're destroying these men, Gadbury whispered. They destroy themselves, Claiborne corrected. I merely facilitate their instruction. They built their fortunes on ownership of human beings. She simply ensures they understand the actual cost of those choices. The 17th sale drew an unusual crowd. Planners who had been conspicuously absent during previous sales suddenly returned, as well as agents representing buyers who preferred not to appear publicly. Word had circulated. Whispers about a remarkable woman sold repeatedly, a woman whose prior owners refused to speak of their reasons for returning her. The bidding opened at $5,000 and climbed rapidly. Gadbury watched the crowd and saw expressions that unsettled him. Desire mingled with something far darker. Not merely the cold appraisal of slave markets, but a hunger to possess the very thing that had supposedly broken other men. A challenge, a dare, proof of superiority. When the hammer fell, the winning bidder was John Calhoun Preston, a 34-year-old planter with some of the state's most profitable cotton holdings. Preston came from impeccable lineage. His uncle was Senator John C. Calhoun, the nation's most powerful defender of slavery. Preston himself had distinguished military service and was being groomed for office. He paid $8,400, an amount so irrational it felt like the culmination of months of escalating madness. Gadbury entered the sale into his ledger with trembling hands. 17 sales complete, 2 remaining, if Claiborne's earlier claims were to be believed. But he had spoken of 19 total, and 17 were now documented. Unless Gadbury had misunderstood, unless Claiborne's pattern extended beyond what he had revealed. That night, sleepless and increasingly disturbed, Gadbury returned to his office. He studied the ledgers again from the beginning. Every date, every name, every price. The rhythm of the transactions, the rising prominence of the buyers, the intensifying emotional fallout. And he saw it clearly. A sequence building towards something deliberate. A structure, a design. The 18th sale would be the penultimate step. The 19th would be the conclusion. But who would the final buyer be? And what exactly made that last purchaser so essential to whatever this was? Transaction the ending point? 3 days after Preston's purchase, Claiborne returned. But this time, he wasn't alone. Deline walked beside him, and Gadbury saw immediately that something had shifted. Her usual guarded neutrality had hardened into something sharper, more deliberate. For the first time in all these months, she looked directly at him, her eyes full of penetrating intelligence that cut through every comfortable illusion he constructed around the situation. Mr. Preston discovered certain incompatibilities, Claiborne said, placing the papers on the desk. The resale authorization is properly executed. However, for this transaction, there will be specific requirements regarding the buyer. What requirements? Gadbury asked. The 18th sale must go to someone with direct authority over this auction house. Someone whose livelihood depends on facilitating these transactions. Someone who has documented every sale meticulously and has been asking questions about the pattern. Claiborne's expression remained neutral, but the meaning was unmistakable. The 18th sale must be to you, Mr. Gadbury. Gadbury felt the floor tilt beneath him. That's impossible. I'm the auctioneer. I don't purchase merchandise, and I don't possess that kind of capital. You have assets, Claiborne said. This building, your business, your reputation. Many creditors would extend loans against those holdings if provided proper collateral. You could secure the necessary funds within 48 hours if you chose. Why would I choose that? Gadbury demanded. I've watched 17 men purchase her and regret it. I've documented the damage these transactions have caused. I have no desire to become the 18th victim in whatever you've engineered. Deline spoke for the first time in Gadbury's presence. Her voice was refined, deliberate, with the faintest trace of an accent, perhaps French, perhaps something older. Because you spent 7 years facilitating the sale of human beings while maintaining records that help you pretend you're merely a professional doing his job. Because you've built your livelihood on the suffering of others while telling yourself you're only the middleman, not responsible for the system itself. Because you deserve to experience what it means to actually own someone, rather than merely processing the paperwork for other men's ownership. Her words were scalpel precise. Gadbury had whispered versions of those same justifications to himself for years. He didn't own plantations. He didn't chain people in fields. He simply facilitated commerce. A professional, a neutral party, a man whose hands were clean because he touched only ink and ledgers. "I won't do it," Gadbury said. "I refuse." "Then the pattern ends here," Claiborne replied. "The 19th sale will never occur. The lesson will remain unfinished." He gathered the documents. "And of course, certain information about your business practices may become public. The private arrangements you've made with buyers to misrepresent the ages of children sold, the false documentation you produced to present 6 ill slaves as healthy, the assistance you provided to planners seeking to bypass laws about separating families. I have extensive records of your activities, Mr. Gadbury. You've been thorough in your ledgers, just not careful enough about which of those ledgers you kept hidden." Gadbury's blood froze. Everything Claiborne listed was true. He had bent rules, altered documents, smoothed over legal restrictions, all justified as necessary for commerce. Nothing other auctioneers didn't also do, but exposed to public scrutiny, especially from abolitionist newspapers in the North. Those actions would destroy him. "You're blackmailing me," Gadbury whispered. "I'm offering you an educational opportunity," Claiborne corrected. "You may decline, but declining has consequences, just as participation has consequences. Life rarely offers simple choices, Mr. Gadbury." For 3 days, Gadbury wrestled with the decision. He reviewed his finances. He considered fleeing Charleston entirely, abandoning the business and starting over somewhere far away. He thought of going to the authorities, though he couldn't even imagine how to describe what had happened, nor what law had actually been broken. In the end, he did what he'd known he would do the moment Claiborne spoke the ultimatum. He secured loans against his business and property. He arranged financing that would cripple him for years. And on October 19, 1844, he purchased a line for $9,000, everything he had accumulated in 7 years of work. He signed his own ledger, officially becoming a slave owner for the first time. The irony burned like acid. "She'll arrive at the auction house tomorrow evening," Claiborne said. "I suggest you prepare for privacy. The instruction she provides is most effective without interruption." That night, Gadbury barely slept. He knew what awaited him. He had watched 17 men endure it. She would speak to him, question him, strip away every rationalization he had ever built to separate himself from the cruelty of his trade. When he arrived at Ryland's Mart the next evening, the line was waiting in his office. Claiborne was gone. The 3-story building, the place that defined his entire professional identity, felt emptier than he had ever known it to be. "Sit down, Mr. Gadbury," she said. "We have much to discuss." She began with simple questions. How he had entered the auction business, what his first sale had felt like, whether he remembered the names of the individuals he had sold. At first, the questions sounded harmless, mere conversation, gentle and calm. But he sensed what lay ahead, the dismantling of the man he had allowed himself to become. Anyone might ask about a man's profession, but gradually the questions sharpened, becoming more precise, more surgical. She asked about specific transactions. An 8-year-old girl sold away from her mother. A man with a half-heel broken leg whom Gadbury had recorded as fully sound. A woman who attempted suicide the night before her sale. Distress he had deliberately concealed from prospective buyers. "I have an excellent memory for names and faces," the line said. "I have made it my business to learn about your career, Mr. Gadbury. You have sold approximately 3,200 people in 7 years. Shall we discuss them?" And she did, one by one. She recited names, ages, physical descriptions. She described families torn apart, children sold from their parents, elderly people discarded when their usefulness waned. She knew details she should not have been able to know, private information from sale records, notes from buyer correspondence, whispered conversations Gadbury had overheard in corners of the auction house and assumed had vanished into the air. She recalled every scar, every plea, every betrayal he had documented or ignored. By dawn, Gadbury sat slumped in his chair, stripped of the professional composure he had guarded for years. She never raised her voice, never accused him. She merely stated facts and asked questions. But the unbroken accumulation of those facts had dismantled every justification he had ever constructed. "You told yourself you were simply facilitating commerce," DeLine said as the first pale light seeped into the office. "That you weren't responsible for the system. That if you didn't do this work, someone else would. These are the justifications used by every participant in evil. The soldier who claims he is following orders. The clerk who insists he is processing paperwork. The businessman who says he is simply answering market demand. I didn't create slavery," Gadbury whispered. "I didn't invent the system." "No," she replied, "but you participated in it with meticulous precision. You organized it. You streamlined it. You transformed human suffering into orderly columns in a ledger and profited from it, while pretending you stood apart from the cruelty you enabled." "Were you?" Gadbury asked. "How is any of this possible? Does it matter?" DeLine replied softly. "Whether I am exactly what I appear to be, a woman sold repeatedly because men find my presence unbearable, or something else entirely, the truth remains. You spent 7 years as an instrument of systematic cruelty. That truth does not change regardless of my nature." She rose and moved toward the door. "Tomorrow, you will authorize my resale. You will take whatever financial loss is required to be rid of me, and then you will spend the rest of your life knowing precisely what you helped build. That knowledge will not fade. Every time you close your eyes, you will see their faces, the 3,200 people whose names I recited tonight. You will not forget them. I have ensured that." She left them alone as full daylight broke over Charleston. Gadbury authorized the resale that afternoon. Claiborne accepted the papers without comment, preparing for the 19th and final transaction. "Who will be the last buyer?" Gadbury asked. His voice sounded hollow, scraped bare of whatever pride or confidence had once filled it. "Someone who represents the culmination of this lesson," Claiborne replied. "Someone whose family has not only participated in this institution, but defended it. Philosophically, legally, morally. Someone shaped entirely by the justifications that sustained this system." The days leading up to the final auction passed in a numb haze. Gadbury continued his duties at Ryland's Mart with mechanical precision, but each sale now felt obscene, an act of quiet violence he could no longer ignore. Faces haunted him. The people DeLine had made him remember, the thousands he had processed without thought. They drifted through his waking hours and invaded his sleep in brief, jagged fragments. Food lost its taste. Conversation fell hollow. The mundane worries of his fellow businessmen, profits, yields, prices, seemed grotesquely trivial against the weight of what he now understood. His hands shook when he opened his ledgers. Once symbols of his professionalism, they now read like archives of destruction. David Brunswell visited twice, concern heavy in his eyes. "You look terrible, Thomas. Whatever happened between you and that woman, it's destroying you." "She made me count them," Gadbury whispered. They were alone in his office. The auction house shuttered for night. "Every person I sold. She knew their names, their ages, their histories. She reminded me of things I forgot, things I forced myself to forget." "That's not possible," Brunswell insisted. "These sales spanned 7 years, thousands of transactions. No one could know all that." "She knew," Gadbury said. "She recited them for hours. A girl named Sarah, 9 years old, taken from her mother in June 1839. A man named Jacob, 62, with a scar on his left hand, cast off in 1841 when he could no longer work. A woman named Rebecca, who begged me not to sell her to a particular buyer because she'd heard of his cruelty. I sold her anyway because he bid high. DeLine knew about Rebecca. She knew exactly what happened to her afterward, details that had never appeared in any official documentation. Brunswell studied his friend's face. "What are you going to do?" "I'm going to document the final sale," Gadbury said, "because that's what I do. I document transactions. I create records, even when those records are evidence of my own damnation." The auction was scheduled for October 26. Despite Gadbury's efforts to keep it quiet, word spread rapidly through Charleston. By mid-morning, the auction house was filling, not with the usual factors and overseers, but with Charleston's elite themselves, men who typically avoided the auction floor, sending agents in their place, now appeared in person. Gadbury recognized faces he normally saw only at the Charleston Club, at St. Michael's Pews, or on the steps of the Exchange Building. The Ravenels, the Alstons, the Pringles, families woven into South Carolina's history since colonial days, men whose fortunes flowed not only from plantations, but from shipping, banking, factoring, the entire machinery built atop slavery. The atmosphere felt unlike any sale Gadbury had conducted. Auctions normally carried an efficient, transactional rhythm, but today the room felt charged, heavy with anticipation. Like the air before a storm, men spoke in hushed tones, falling silent whenever someone approached. Eyes flicked repeatedly toward the doorway, waiting for Claiborne to enter with DeLine. When she finally appeared beside him, a palpable shift rippled through the crowd. Gadbury watched Charleston's most powerful men react to her, not with a detached calculation reserved for slave auctions, but with something tangled and uneasy, fear braided with fascination, desire weighted by dread. Several buyers from previous sales stood at the back, their expressions neutral but their posture stiff, as if bracing for something. Gadbury took his place at the front beside the raised platform where merchandise was displayed. His hands trembled as he opened his ledger to a blank page, the final entry in a sequence that had consumed 8 months and shattered 17 men. "Gentlemen," he began, projecting the familiar authority that now fell hollow, "we proceed with the sale of inventory number 84473. Female, approximately 28 years of age, experienced in household management, fluent in French, skilled in needlework and music, literate, distinctive marking, 3 dots forming a triangle on the left shoulder blade." He did not mention the 18 previous sales. He did not acknowledge the impossible pattern every man in the room knew, but none would articulate. Omission felt like complicity, though he no longer understood where complicity ended and routine began. "Bidding opens at $5,000, Gadbury announced. The response was instantaneous, aggressive. Voices burst forward from every corner of the room. 6,000. 7. 8. Numbers climbed in a frenzy that defied all economic logic. The increments grew larger, the urgency sharper. Men were no longer bidding on property. They were competing in something far more psychological. They had heard the rumors of previous buyers. Powerful men humbled and forced to relinquish her. Each bidder believed he would be the exception, that his will, his status, his mastery would hold, that whatever had broken the others would not break him. At $10,000, Gadbury noticed Langdon Cheeves Jr. entering the auction house. Cheeves moved through the crowd with the assurance of someone raised in unquestioned privilege. At 39, he embodied Charleston aristocracy at its apex. Old wealth, political pedigree, unwavering belief in the righteousness of the Southern order. His family had not merely embraced slavery. They had defended it in essays, pamphlets, speeches, a philosophical pillar of the institution. He raised his hand. 12,000. A hush fell. The escalation shocked even the most hardened buyers. Hesitation rippled through the room. Calculations being revised, ambitions weighed against risk. 13,000. Called Augustus Rowe, a rice planter known for squeezing immense profits from Georgetown lands. 15. Cheeves answered instantly. 16, Rowe countered, though uncertainty crept into his tone. 17, Cheeves said, his voice smooth, final. An announcement of dominance, a declaration that he would outbid any man alive, no matter the cost. Rowe lifted his hand, paused, and lowered it. Silence spread. Men who had been bidding moments earlier now stood motionless. The message was unmistakable. Cheeves had claimed his purchase, and to challenge him further would no longer be business. It would be open social warfare, a contest of stature with consequences far beyond the auction block. Gadbury's gaze shifted between Cheeves and Deline. She stood as she always had, still, composed, unreadable, yet something in her eyes acknowledged him, as though she recognized precisely who he was, and that he was the end point this entire sequence had been designed to reach. 17,000, Gadbury repeated. Going once, a ritual pause. The room held its breath. Going twice, another pause. Sold to Mr. Langdon Cheeves, Jr. The gavel struck, and something fundamental shifted in atmosphere, an invisible pressure lifting or settling. Gadbury could not tell which. Men began leaving quickly, their boots echoing on the wooden floor, as if eager to distance themselves from whatever would happen next. The men who had previously purchased a line slipped out, without even glancing at Cheeves, their faces smooth, but their posture tense. Cheeves stepped to the desk where Gadbury was preparing the final documents. He signed them with a dramatic flourish, his signature bold, confident, forceful. "Have her taken to my estate this evening," he said. "I want her settled in the main house before nightfall." "Yes, sir," Gadbury replied quietly. He watched Cheeves depart, then noticed Claiborne near the doorway, studying the final buy with an expression that might have been satisfaction or inevitability fulfilled. That evening, as Gadbury arranged the line's transport to the Cheeves estate, she spoke to him one last time. "You understand now, don't you, Mr. Gadbury, what all of this has been about?" "Education," Gadbury said softly. "You've been educating us about what we chose to participate in." "Not all of you," Deline corrected. "Most people who participate in evil never truly confront it. They carry their illusions comfortably to their graves. But you, 19 of you, have been forced to see clearly, to understand what it means to own another human being, to comprehend the weight of that relationship and your role in sustaining it." "Why specifically?" Gadbury asked. "Why these particular men?" She held his gaze. "Because you represent the system at every level. Cheeves and men like him provide the philosophy, the moral justifications that allow ordinary people to accept the unacceptable. You," she continued, "facilitate the machinery itself. You keep the gears turning, and all of you profit from it while pretending you bear no responsibility for its cruelties." "What will happen to Cheeves?" Gadbury asked, though he already knew. "The same thing that happened to the others," Deline said. "He will learn, and learning will destroy the comfortable certainties his entire identity depends upon." She was taken to the Cheeves estate that night. Gadbury never saw her again. The whispers began within days. Household staff reported strange occurrences, their master spending entire nights in his study with a new acquisition, conversations stretching until dawn, raised voices leaking through thick wooden doors. Never clear, only sharp enough to unsettle servants who had never heard their master sound like that. The city's gossip network spread the details quickly. Factors who worked with Cheeves began mentioning odd changes, missed appointments, neglected correspondence, business affairs left unattended. The supreme confidence that had always radiated from Langdon Cheeves, Jr. had dimmed, something shaken loose inside him. On the fourth day, a messenger arrived at Ryland's Mart carrying a frantic letter. The handwriting was wild, trembling. "Gadbury, the woman is unsuitable, entirely unsuitable. I cannot, the things she knows. Remove her. I do not care about compensation. Remove her at once." Before Gadbury could even respond, a second messenger arrived with different news. Langdon Cheeves, Jr. had filed manumission papers. He was freeing Deline, not selling her, not returning her. freeing her outright and granting funds for travel north to Pennsylvania. The news tore through Charleston society like a lightning strike. The chief's family did not free slaves. They defended slavery with speeches, pamphlets, editorials, legal frameworks. Their name was synonymous with pro-slavery ideology. For chiefs to free a slave, especially one purchased at an astronomical price, was tantamount to heresy. Gadbury studied the manumission documents when they were filed. They were perfectly executed, but the margins contained notes, scrawled fragments revealing a mind cracking under its own revelations. She recited the names, all of them, people my family has owned for 4 generations. She knew their stories, the punishments, the separations, things no record contains. She asked me to explain my philosophies, then dismantled them one by one, showed me how every argument was self-deception. Some lines were barely legible, written as if in desperation. I cannot hold this knowledge. 73 people, across 3 plantations. I gave orders. I believed I was managing property. She made me see them. I cannot live with this understanding. Freedom is not enough, but necessary. Gadbury read the notes in silence, recognizing every stage of collapse. The same process he'd endured, the same unraveling of illusions, the same unbearable clarity. Whispers continued spreading about the others who had purchased the line. Robert Drayton sold his plantation and moved into a small townhouse in the city, living quietly and speaking little. Charles Coatsworth Pinkham freed 6 enslaved people. Not all, but 6 specific individuals whose stories, apparently, mirrored something the line had told him. Theodore Gallard stopped attending church completely, unable to sit through sermons that praised a social order he now understood as poisonous to the core. None of these men ever spoke publicly about what they learned. How could they? Admitting that an enslaved woman had forced them to confront the immorality of slavery would have obliterated their reputations. Acknowledging that someone they had purchased as property had revealed truths they themselves could not bear, truths that broke them, would have been social suicide in Charleston. So they remained silent and suffered privately. Their transformations were visible only in altered routines, in quiet withdrawals, in unexplained decisions that their peers could neither interpret nor accept. Gadbury continued documenting these patterns, but his record-keeping had changed. He was no longer creating business entries. He was building a chronicle of something far beyond commerce. He noted the dates on which each buyer was affected, the exact behavioral shifts, the dismantling of their identities. A map of unraveling. Langdon Cheeves's decline was the most dramatic. His health deteriorated quickly. No physician could identify an illness, yet something essential in him had broken. He lost weight despite eating well. His hair went gray in mere weeks. A tremor overtook his hands, making writing nearly impossible. By December 1844, Cheeves had sold nearly all of his plantations, thousands of acres, hundreds of enslaved people, generational wealth. His family was horrified, but legally powerless to stop him. He used part of the money to establish a fund for the education of free black residents in Charleston, a gesture so radically opposed to his lifelong politics that many believed he had lost his mind. He died in March 1847, at age 44. The death certificate cited heart failure, but those who knew him understood the truth. Whatever killed him had begun the night the line spoke to him, the night he was forced to confront what he had spent his entire life refusing to see. As for Deline herself, she disappeared entirely from the historical record after her manumission. All that survives are documents confirming her freedom and the funds granted for her travel north. No census entries in Pennsylvania, no marriage licenses, no property deeds, no obituary, nothing that would anchor her to the decades that followed. Gadbury searched for her after he moved to Baltimore. He asked among the free black community. He contacted abolitionist groups in Pennsylvania, New York, Massachusetts. Not a single person had ever heard of anyone who matched her description. It was as though she had completed her purpose in Charleston. and then simply left the historical world altogether. Gadbury survived until 1863, dying of pneumonia as Union forces closed in on Charleston. In his final months, he made repeated attempts to write a comprehensive account of what happened in 1844. Dozens of incomplete manuscripts remain, each trying to capture the impossible, each abandoned as inadequate. His final attempt began. I have spent 19 years trying to understand what happened during those 8 months. Whether she was what she appeared to be, a woman of extraordinary intelligence who somehow gained power over Charleston's elite, or something else entirely, remains unclear. What is certain is that 19 men learned truths about themselves that destroyed their peace forever. We were educated about complicity, about the precise ways we profited from systematic cruelty while maintaining illusions of innocence. That education was more devastating than any punishment could have been. The manuscript ended mid-sentence. Gadbury had been unable to continue. When the Charleston Historical Society acquired his documents in the 1870s, they noted the anomalous series of sales recorded in his Rhines Mart ledger. In 1891, concerned about how northern newspapers might weaponize these records as anti-Southern propaganda, city officials quietly removed several pages documenting the Line 17 sales. Those pages were sealed in restricted archives where they remain to this day, accessible only with special governmental approval that is almost never granted. Researchers studying antebellum Charleston occasionally encounter hints of case, passing references in private correspondence, ledger fragments that avoided censorship, inconsistencies in the state documents, but the core records remain locked away. Gadbury's ledgers with their impossible sequence, the private notes from broken buyers, the descriptions of conversations that shatter men, none are publicly viewable. The official explanation claims clerical confusion or mistaken identities. But Thomas Gadbury built his career on precision. His records are impeccable. They do not contain errors, especially not errors that replicate themselves 17 times. What remains is rumor and speculation. Stories whisper about the woman sold 19 times, about the night-long conversations, about powerful men who emerge visibly altered, shaken, hollowed, undone, about certainties shattered, about illusions destroyed, about the unbearable price of understanding one's own complicity. The South Carolina archives remain closed. The missing pages have never resurfaced. And if you ask archivists or historians about anomalous sales at Rhines Mart, most will tell you no such records exist. But among serious scholars, the questions persist. How could one woman be sold 19 times in 8 months? How could legally flawless documents appear for a person with no origin? What actually occurred in those private rooms between the Line and the men who believed they owned her? The simplest answer and the most unsettling is that events unfolded exactly as recorded, that for 8 months in 1844, 19 men who profited from slavery were forced to understand what they truly were, and that understanding broke them in ways no whip or chain ever could. Somewhere in a restricted Charleston archive lies proof that justice sometimes arrives in forms we cannot fully comprehend. What do you think of this story? Do you believe everything was revealed, or is more still hidden behind those sealed pages? Share your theories below. What really happened in Charleston that year? If this tale made you think, subscribe to the channel and tap that notification bell. We explore forgotten mysteries from American history every week. Share this video with someone who appreciates dark historical stories, and I'll see you next time when we uncover another secret powerful people try to bury.